Chasing the thief?
These could be fake.
They're not fake. Call it in.
You expect me to just take this at face value?
No. I expect you to verify it.
Why are you out here in an unmarked car?
Federal field work.
I already told you that. That's convenient.
No, it's consistent.
Sheriff, we should verify first.
I know what I'm doing.
Sheriff Grant Hollis believed he had stopped a man using fake federal credentials to dodge a roadside search. The facts were the exact opposite. The driver was Special Agent Adrian Cross, a real federal investigator, and Hollis put him in cuffs after looking at valid ID. That mistake didn't stay a mistake for long. It turned into an internal affairs case, then a federal prosecution, and by the end of it, Hollis was the one standing in court hearing a prison sentence tied to his own abuse of power. Drop your state or country in the comments. And if you like stories where recorded facts destroy official lies, like the video and subscribe, this case is a perfect example of how one bad decision can pull an entire department into a federal mess. Now, back to the road where it started. Grant Hollis had spent years building a department around himself. 11 years as sheriff, 2 election wins, total control over a small county office. People under him knew how he operated. He pushed stops hard, expected instant compliance, and treated disagreement as a challenge to his authority. That kind of command style creates its own problem. Deputies stop slowing things down when they should. They start reading the boss instead of reading the law. Adrian Cross was finishing fieldwork on a federal corruption case that touched local contractors and public money. Plainclothes, unmarked sedan, no marked unit, no raid jacket, no reason to stand out. He was leaving the area after a routine part of the job and heading back to file reports. Just after dark, Hollis saw Cross's sedan on a county road near an area where local patrol units had been active. Later, Hollis gave more than one reason for the stop. First, he said the car looked suspicious. Then he added hesitation at an intersection. Later, he mentioned a lane issue. Investigators would compare those explanations against the footage and the timing. They didn't line up well. But in the moment, Hollis made the stop and committed himself to it. Cross pulled over without delay. Nothing about the stop suggested a threat. The car came to a proper stop on the shoulder. Cross stayed inside and kept his hands visible. Hollis still walked up with the attitude of a man who had already decided he was dealing with trouble. Deputy Aaron Shaw arrived first. Deputy Mason Kerr came in right behind her. With backup on scene, Hollis had what mattered most to him in moments like this: witnesses from his own office. Cross identified himself as federal law enforcement early in the encounter. He explained that he had credentials and said where they were located. He was giving Hollis a clear way to verify identity before doing anything reckless. Hollis ignored the off-ramp. He ordered Cross out of the sedan, searched him, and recovered the credentials himself. That should have slowed the stop down. A careful officer would have checked the ID through dispatch, contacted a federal supervisor, and sorted it out before escalating. Hollis went the other direction. He looked at the credentials and treated them as part of the problem instead of the answer. From there, the stop got worse fast. Cross repeated his name and agency. He kept telling Hollis to verify the identification before making a bigger mistake. Shaw was already reading the scene differently than Kerr. She wasn't siding with the driver, and she was doing her job and noticing that the legal basis for the stop was getting weaker, not stronger. Kerr followed Hollis and acted like they were dealing with a fraud case. Hollis started stacking excuses. He said the credentials might be fake. He said Cross wasn't following commands quickly enough. He framed the situation as obstruction. None of that changed the basic problem. He had no clear crime and no immediate threat. But he kept pushing because backing off in front of his deputies would have felt like losing control. Then he handcuffed him. That was the point where the case changed shape. A rough traffic stop can still be defended as bad judgment. Cuffing a federal agent after reviewing valid credentials creates a much harder question. Was this confusion, or was this an officer using his badge to force a false version of events? Cross stayed controlled. That helped him later. He didn't turn it into a roadside argument. He didn't get loud. He kept identifying himself and asking for verification. When Hollis later tried to describe him as evasive and difficult, the body cam footage undercut that claim. Shaw raised the issue of verification. She did it carefully because she knew who she was talking to. Hollis shut her down in front of Kerr and ordered transport to county booking. That decision made the exposure much worse. Once Hollis sent Cross to booking, the event stopped being just a bad stop on the side of a road. From that point on, every record mattered. The body cam footage mattered. The dash cam mattered. Dispatch audio mattered. The booking desk cameras mattered. The arrest report mattered. So did the timeline, minute by minute. On the drive to the station, Cross again requested contact with a supervisor or federal liaison. Hollis didn't help him. Kerr backed the sheriff's version. Shaw said little, but by then she already knew the office was heading into dangerous territory. The booking area created the first real crack in Hollis's control. Jail staff had seen fake IDs before. Cross didn't present like someone bluffing under pressure. He gave exact agency information, stayed consistent, and answered every question directly. Staff checked the credentials, then looked back at Hollis. That shift in attention said a lot. The uncertainty was no longer centered on the man in cuffs. It was centered on the sheriff who brought him in. Hollis still forced the process forward. He told staff to continue while verification was pending. Then he began shaping the arrest paperwork around the outcome he wanted. That move became a major issue later. Investigators would argue that he wasn't documenting facts as they developed. He was trying to build cover after the arrest had already gone bad. Outside the sheriff's office, the situation was moving out of local hands. Calls were starting to reach federal supervisors. Agency channels were waking up. The message was simple and damaging. A county sheriff had detained and booked a federal agent after being shown credentials. Hollis still thought the station was his ground and the paperwork would protect him. He was wrong. Because once federal officials started calling back, this stopped being a county matter. It became a question of unlawful detention, civil rights violations, false reporting, and whether a sheriff had used his office to punish a man for not submitting to a bad stop. The first serious problem hit the booking desk before any outside supervisor walked through the door. A jail sergeant took Cross's credentials, checked the badge wallet, and asked for agency contact information. Cross gave it without hesitation. Same agency, same office, same identifying details he had already given on the roadside. Everything stayed consistent. That's what started moving people away from Hollis's version. A liar usually adjusts. Cross didn't need to. Hollis still tried to control the room. He told staff to finish intake and hold Cross while his office sorted it out. That sounds ordinary until you look at what he actually had at that point. No confirmed fake ID. No solid traffic offense supporting a custodial arrest. No violent conduct. No probable cause for some hidden crime that would justify treating a federal credential as a prop. He had a stop that got out of hand and a booking process that was making it worse. Deputy Erin Shaw saw it clearly by then. She wasn't making speeches. She didn't need to. She watched the jail sergeant look longer at the credentials than at the booking form. She saw dispatch ask for clarification twice because the charge language coming from Hollis and Kerr didn't stay consistent. First it leaned on obstruction, then failure to comply, then concern about false identification. Same event, different labels. That's a bad sign in any case. In a case involving a federal agent, it's a disaster. Mason Kerr stayed with Hollis. That choice made sense in the moment. Hollis was still sheriff. Kerr was still a deputy in his chain of command. Small departments work like that. A bad order doesn't always get challenged when it should. People think about promotions, schedules, transfers, discipline. They think about tomorrow morning. They don't always think about federal court 6 months later. Cross asked again for contact with a federal supervisor. This time, the request didn't die in the room. The jail sergeant made the call through official channels. He didn't ask Hollis for permission. He did what any competent booking officer would do when presented with credentials that looked real in an arrest that didn't make sense. That call broke the sheriff's control over the situation. Within minutes, the response from the federal side changed the pace of everything. The first person reached wasn't some random desk clerk. It was a supervisory contact who recognized Cross's name immediately. That person asked basic verification questions: badge number, office assignment, approximate stop location, booking time. The answers matched. Then came the follow-up that put the whole room on edge. The federal office wanted to know why one of its agents was in county custody at all. Nobody in booking had a clean answer. Hollis tried to step in and frame it as an officer safety stop involving suspicious behavior and questionable credentials. That didn't help him. He was now talking to people who knew exactly how federal credentials looked, how agents carried them, and how roadside verification should work. His version no longer sounded tough. It sounded sloppy. That was the moment the station started turning against him. Not openly, not yet. But people stopped moving with his usual confidence. The jail sergeant slowed intake. Shaw stopped treating the paperwork like routine processing and started reading every line. Even Kerr got quieter once he understood the federal office wasn't confused about Cross's identity. They were confused about why the sheriff thought he could ignore it. The next mistake came from Hollis trying to protect the first one. Instead of releasing Cross immediately and documenting the stop as a verification failure, he leaned into the arrest report. He wanted the language tightened up. He wanted the stop to look more justified on paper than it had looked on video. He pushed the idea that Cross had created the confusion by not complying quickly enough. That argument had a simple problem. The footage already existed, and the footage didn't support it. Shaw knew exactly what that meant. A bad arrest can end one career. Bad video plus bad paperwork can end several. She pulled Kerr aside and asked whether he was really going to sign off on a report that might not survive a basic review. Kerr didn't have a good answer. He still wasn't ready to break from Hollis, but the confidence was gone. He had been acting like backup on a fraud stop. Now he was standing in a county jail while federal supervisors demanded an explanation for why their agent had been booked. Cross remained in custody during all of this, and that part became crucial later. Time matters in detention cases. Every extra minute after identity is confirmed raises the stakes. Once the federal office verified him, the legal risk jumped. From that point, the question wasn't whether Hollis had made a mistake. The question was why he kept going after the mistake became obvious. A federal supervisor arrived at the station faster than Hollis expected. He came with calm authority, not drama. That made it worse. No yelling, no threats. Just direct questions, immediate recognition of Cross's credentials, and a request for the full basis of arrest. Hollis didn't have one that held up. He had fragments, suspicion, non-compliance, concern about fake ID. None of it worked together. That was the real shift. People in the building saw the same thing at the same time. Cross was exactly who he said he was. Hollis had been wrong at the roadside, then wrong at booking, then wrong again when he tried to hold the line instead of fixing it. The room didn't need a speech. The facts had already done the job. Cross was released, but by then the damage was done. Release didn't clean it up. Release proved he never should have been booked in the first place. Before the night ended, the federal office requested preservation of bodycam footage, dash cam footage, booking video, dispatch logs, and all arrest paperwork. That request alone told the department this wasn't staying informal. Hollis had moved past embarrassment and into investigation territory, and internal affairs hadn't even started yet. By the next morning, this had moved out of normal chain of command damage control. Internal affairs opened a formal investigation because the arrest had collapsed on basic verification. That point mattered. Adrian Cross wasn't released because somebody did him a favor. He was released because the sheriff's office could no longer defend holding him. Investigators started with the recordings. They collected Grant Hollis's body camera, Aaron Shaw's body camera, Mason Kerr's body camera, dash camera footage, booking desk video, hallway video, dispatch audio, computer logs, call records, and every version of the arrest paperwork. Then they built the timeline minute by minute. That timeline killed Hollis's story. Cross identified himself early on the roadside. Hollis recovered federal credentials during the stop. Shaw raised the need to verify before transport. Booking staff slowed down once they looked at the credentials. A federal supervisor confirmed Cross's identity while he was still in custody. Even after that, Hollis didn't fix the arrest right away. That sequence became the center of the case. Internal Affairs wasn't dealing with one bad judgment call. They were looking at a series of choices, each one worse than the last. Hollis had chances to stop. He didn't take them. Then he tried to make the paperwork support decisions that already looked weak on video. His first interview with Internal Affairs made things worse. He said Cross acted evasive. The footage didn't show that. He said the credentials looked suspicious. Booking staff didn't treat them that way. He said he needed more time to verify identity. The call records showed that the federal office had already confirmed who Cross was before the detention ended. That changed the investigation. At first, Internal Affairs was reviewing arrest procedure and policy violations. After that interview, the focus widened. Now, investigators were looking at honesty, report language, and whether Hollis had tried to create cover after the fact. Then, they pulled prior complaints. Not every complaint against Hollis had been sustained. That's normal in law enforcement cases. Still, several looked familiar once investigators compared them side by side. Aggressive stop, weak legal basis, escalation after a challenge, charges changing during the report process, deputies feeling pressure to support the sheriff's version. Cross's arrest no longer looked isolated. It looked like the worst version of an old pattern. Aaron Shaw became one of the most important witnesses in the building. She told Internal Affairs exactly what happened. No big speech, no trying to make herself the hero. She said Cross identified himself early. She said Hollis had the credentials in hand before transport. She said she raised verification concerns and got shut down. That made her hard to attack. Her account matched the footage, the timing, and the booking records. Mason Kerr held out longer. At first, he backed Hollis. He described the stop as a reasonable fraud concern and tried to keep the arrest inside that frame. Internal Affairs pushed back with timestamps, dispatch traffic, and video from booking. Kerr's position got weaker every time they showed him another record. He finally admitted Hollis kept changing the reason for the stop. He also admitted the report language was being adjusted after the arrest had already started falling apart. That admission changed everything. Once a deputy says the report was shaped to justify the arrest, the case stops being only about bad policing. Now it's about false documentation, abuse of authority, and whether the sheriff used his office to turn a personal mistake into an official lie. The county saw the danger by then. Hollis was placed on administrative leave. Publicly, the county said it needed a full review. Internally, people were protecting themselves. Command staff didn't want their names attached to the arrest. The county attorney didn't want to defend a case built on shifting explanations and bad footage. Even deputies who had kept quiet under Hollis started speaking more carefully because they knew the recordings were stronger than any internal loyalty. The federal side was already moving. Cross's agency made a formal referral. The Department of Justice reviewed the stop, the detention, the booking, and the reporting. From that point on, Hollis had two problems. Internal Affairs was building the administrative case. Federal prosecutors were deciding whether his conduct crossed into criminal territory. It did. The legal theory came together from the evidence, not from politics. Hollis had detained a federal agent without a solid basis, ignored valid credentials, kept the detention going after identity was confirmed, and tried to support the arrest with changing explanations. Prosecutors didn't need a dramatic conspiracy. They had body camera footage, dispatch records, booking video, staff testimony, and a clean timeline. That's the kind of case officers fear most. No guesswork, no messy witness memory, just records. By the time the federal indictment was being prepared, Hollis still acted like he could survive it the same way he had survived complaints in his own county. He was badly misreading the situation. County politics can bury a grievance. They can't erase federal evidence. And once the indictment came down, the story changed again. It wasn't about whether Hollis had gone too far in a traffic stop. It was about whether a sheriff had used his badge, his office, and his subordinates to carry out an unlawful detention and then hide it behind official paperwork. The federal indictment ended the political part of the story. Grant Hollis was charged with violating civil rights under color of law, unlawful detention, obstruction, and false statements tied to the arrest and report. His defense tried to frame the stop as a fast-moving judgment call. That argument didn't hold up because the evidence showed repeated chances to correct it. At trial, the prosecution stayed simple. Adrian Cross testified that he identified himself early, presented valid credentials, and kept asking for verification. Erin Shaw backed the timeline and confirmed she raised concerns before transport. Mason Kerr did the most damage. He admitted Hollis kept changing the reason for the stop and pushed to shape the paperwork after the arrest had already gone bad. The recordings finished the job. Body camera footage showed Cross staying controlled. Dispatch records showed federal identity was confirmed while he was still being held. Booking video showed staff losing confidence in Hollis's version before the release. Once jurors saw the timeline in order, the defense lost ground fast. Hollis tried leaning on authority and officer judgment. The court didn't buy it. Qualified immunity didn't save him because this was not a close call. The judge made that clear. A sheriff had no right to ignore valid credentials, hold a man without a lawful basis, and then force the paperwork to fit the arrest. The jury convicted him. At sentencing, the judge focused on abuse of trust. Hollis wasn't punished for making one mistake on a dark road. He was punished because he kept going after the truth was in front of him. He received a federal prison sentence, lost his office, and left the courthouse as a convicted former sheriff instead of the most powerful man in his county. The fallout didn't stop with him. The county changed arrest review procedures, required outside review for interagency detention cases, expanded body camera retention rules, and tightened reporting oversight. Deputies who had stayed quiet under Hollis now had a case everyone pointed to when talking about what happens when rank goes unchecked. That's the whole point of this story. Grant Hollis thought his badge gave him the final word. It didn't. Facts did. Video did. Paperwork did. And once all of it was lined up, his own office couldn't protect him from what he had done. Tell me what you think. Would you have trusted the sheriff's version before the footage came out? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe.
I asked for the credentials again. Don't make me keep asking.
I'm not making anything difficult. You're turning the sidewalk stop into something else.
Name, address, why you're in this area.
I already answered that.
Then answer it again.
You need to slow down and actually look at what's in your hand.
You don't tell me how to do my job.
Then do it with judgment.
You're under...
This patrolman thought he was making a simple jaywalking stop. He was actually creating the worst moment of his career. He put his hands on a calm pedestrian, ignored the credentials in the man's wallet, and treated a minor street stop like a test of control. He had no idea the man he was detaining was Lieutenant General Victor Hale, a 3-star Army officer whose identity was about to come back through dispatch. Tell me where you're watching from. If you like stories about bad policing, body cam fallout, and people exposing themselves with their own decisions, like the video and subscribe. The footage started in a downtown block near a federal hotel and conference area. City police worked that zone every day. Military staff moved through it too, usually in civilian clothes. Any officer with sense knew that. It didn't mean giving people special treatment. It meant paying attention before turning a small stop into a problem. Patrolman Eric Mays didn't pay attention. He saw a man cross outside the marked crosswalk and jumped on it right away. Traffic wasn't heavy. Nobody had slammed on the brakes. The man had already made it across and was walking toward the hotel side of the street. Mays still pulled up hard, got out, and started the stop like he had just caught somebody doing more than crossing in the wrong place. That man was Victor Hale. He was in civilian clothes after a defense-related meeting, mid-50s. Clean posture, controlled movements, no sign of panic, no aggression. On camera, he looked like a person used to order and used to pressure. He also looked like someone who expected basic professionalism. Mays opened with authority, not judgment. He announced the jaywalking stop and demanded identification almost at once. Hale answered calmly and tried to explain where he had come from. Mays cut him off. Hale tried again. Same result. That set the tone. This could have ended with a warning, maybe a brief check. 30 seconds, maybe a minute. Instead, Mays made it personal. His body cam showed a pattern that looked bad from the start. Fast commands, no patience, and no real interest in what the other man was saying. Hale did not match that energy. He stayed measured. He signaled in a controlled way that the officer was overplaying a minor stop. Mays heard confidence and treated it like disrespect. That's where bad officers get themselves in trouble. They stop handling the situation in front of them and start reacting to how they feel. Mays asked for the wallet again, sharper this time. Hale complied. He moved carefully and made it clear where he was reaching. That should have lowered the temperature. It didn't. Mays stayed wound up and took the wallet with the attitude of someone expecting to prove something. He flipped through it too fast. That mattered because the wallet didn't hold just a license and credit cards. Review notes later pointed to military credentials and access material that should have made him stop and reassess. Not because rank makes somebody untouchable. It doesn't. The issue was judgment. A smart officer sees federal or military indicators and verifies before escalating. Mays kept going like he hadn't seen any of it. He pressed for more information, name, address, why he was in the area. Hale answered. Mays kept the same tone. Short, hard, suspicious. Nothing in Hale's conduct justified that level of pressure. He wasn't evasive. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't trying to leave. Mays just wanted full control of the stop. Hale gave him another chance to fix it. He indicated that the situation was becoming serious and that the officer needed to slow down. Mays dismissed it. He treated the warning like something he'd heard from random people before. Then he made the stop worse. The body cam showed him moving in and detaining Hale over a jaywalking stop. He turned him toward the patrol car and put hands on him, even though there was still no threat, no resistance, and no real reason to use force. Hale did not fight him. He did not argue physically. He stayed controlled and let the moment play out. That left one person on camera escalating, and it wasn't the general. Mays kept issuing short commands, while Hale responded in the same steady way he had from the beginning. That contrast did more damage to the officer than he seemed to realize. One man looked disciplined. The other looked like he had lost perspective over a sidewalk stop. Then Mays checked the wallet again. He still didn't stop. That's one of the ugliest parts of the scene. Missing something once can happen. Missing it twice means the officer is no longer processing facts. He's working off ego. The incident review later made that clear. There were visible signs in that wallet that should have changed the pace, the tone, and the officer's next decision. Mays stayed on the same track. He demanded more identifying details. Hale provided them. Mays asked for his social security number. Hale gave it after making it clear, again, that the officer was creating a serious problem for himself. Mays ignored that warning too and walked back to the cruiser to run the information. Now the stop was about to leave his control. That's the danger for officers who build a whole story in their own head. The database doesn't care about their mood. Dispatch doesn't care how confident they sounded 2 minutes earlier. Once the information goes in, the facts take over. Mays radioed the name, Victor Daniel Hale. Dispatch repeated it back. He gave the date of birth, then the number. Dispatch asked him to repeat part of it. He did. A pause followed. Longer than usual. Mays stood by the cruiser waiting for the return. His body cam picked up the shift before the radio did. He looked back toward Hale. He checked the wallet again. His posture changed a little. The edge was still there, but the certainty wasn't. That pause told him something was off. He confirmed the name one more time when dispatch asked. Then he waited again. Hale stayed where Mays had placed him, calm, silent, watching. He had stopped trying to explain himself by then. There was no point. The officer had already ignored every obvious sign in front of him. The radio was going to do the job now. That was the hard part to watch back. Mays had several chances to step back before this turned into a career problem. He could have changed course when he saw Hale's demeanor. He could have changed course when the wallet came out. He could have changed course when the warning came. He passed every off-ramp because he wanted the stop to stay about him. Dispatch came back and told him to remain on scene and wait for a supervisor. That changed his face. He looked at the wallet again, slower this time. Then he looked over at Hale. The confidence was gone. He knew enough by then. He might not have had the full rank yet, but he knew the man against the cruiser was not who he had assumed. And in the next few seconds, the radio was going to make that official. Dispatch came back on a secured tone and told Patrolman Eric Mays to confirm the full name again. He did. Then dispatch gave him the rank. Lieutenant General Victor Hale. Active status. Federal clearance attached. Keep the subject on scene. Supervisor en route. That was the moment the stop collapsed. Mays had spent the last several minutes acting like he was controlling a jaywalking stop. Now he understood he had detained a 3-star general in public over a minor pedestrian violation while ignoring credentials that should have changed the whole contact. The body cam caught the change right away. His shoulders dropped. His voice lost the edge. He looked at the wallet again, but now he wasn't flipping through it to challenge anything. Now he was looking at it like it might somehow undo what had already happened. It couldn't. He walked back toward Hale, and his language changed fast. The commands were gone. The sharp tone was gone. What came out instead was the kind of rushed apology officers use when they know the facts have turned against them. Hale didn't help him. He stayed calm. He stayed direct. He told Mays that the real issue was not the jaywalking stop. The issue was judgment. The issue was that Mays had escalated first, assessed later, and ignored clear indicators the whole way through. He made it plain that this was a professionalism failure before it was anything else. That hit harder than yelling would have. Hale didn't need to raise his voice. He had already won the moment by staying in control of himself while the officer lost control of the stop. Mays started trying to explain. He referred to procedure. He referred to officer safety. He referred to needing compliance. None of it sounded strong on camera because the footage had already shown the full sequence. There had been no threat, no aggression, no reason to treat the encounter like a physical detention. Hale cut through that without getting emotional. He made the point that procedure did not excuse bad judgment. He told Mays that authority without discipline was a liability. That was the kind of correction that lands because it's true, and because the person saying it clearly knows what disciplined authority looks like. Mays removed his hands completely and stepped back. He looked around the street for a second, probably trying to figure out how exposed the scene already was. Too late for that. The body cam was running. Nearby traffic cameras covered the block. The radio log existed. Dispatch had flagged it. From that point on, the stop had a record beyond anything he could write later. Within minutes, a supervisor arrived. Sergeant Nolan Price got out of his unit already moving fast. Dispatch had given him enough to know this was not a normal field assist. He came in with the kind of face supervisors wear when they've realized one of their officers has created a problem bigger than the original stop by a factor of 50. He spoke to Mays first, low and quick. The body cam didn't catch every word clearly, but enough came through to understand the tone. Price wanted a direct explanation. Mays tried to give one. It sounded weak. There was no good version of what had happened. The footage was against him. The wallet was against him. Dispatch was against him. The subject's conduct was against him. Every part of the record pointed in the same direction. Price then turned to Hale. His tone was completely different. Professional, careful, controlled. He identified himself, acknowledged the seriousness of the stop, and made it clear that Hale was no longer being detained. He also apologized in a way that showed he understood the problem was not just mistaken identity. The problem was the officer's conduct from the first contact forward. Hale listened and answered without dragging it out. He explained that he had tried several times to de-escalate the encounter and had been ignored each time. He pointed out that Mays had seen enough in the wallet to know he needed to slow down. He also made clear that this was bigger than embarrassment. A street officer had physically detained a senior military official while failing basic standards of observation and courtesy in a shared jurisdiction area. That last point mattered. This was not just some random downtown block. It was an area where city police, federal personnel, and military officials crossed paths all the time. That meant judgment mattered more, not less. No one was asking the officer to salute anyone or waive the law. They were expecting him to act like a professional adult before escalating physical contact. Price understood that immediately. He asked Hale whether he required medical attention. Hale said no. He asked whether Hale wanted the contact documented at the scene beyond the body cam and incident record. Hale said it would be documented in full, one way or another. That answer put another level of pressure on everyone standing there. Mays stayed mostly quiet during this part. That silence said enough. He knew the stop was no longer his to explain away. His earlier confidence had been replaced by the look officers get when they realize supervisors are no longer there to support them, but to contain the damage. Another unit pulled up shortly after that. Not lights, not a dramatic entrance, just more command presence. Price was building a buffer around the scene and making sure no one made it worse. That alone told you dispatch had already elevated it internally. Hale finally addressed Mays one more time. He told him, in plain terms, that rank was not the lesson here. Character was. If Mays had handled the stop with basic courtesy, the identity check would have happened without force, without humiliation, and without consequences beyond a short conversation. Instead, he chose pressure first. That choice had now created a record no one in the department would be able to ignore. That was the cleanest summary of the whole incident. Mays didn't have a real response to it. Price then informed Hale that the matter would be referred upward immediately. That wasn't empty reassurance. At that point, referral was mandatory. The detention of a general officer in a recorded public stop was already beyond informal cleanup. Internal affairs would see it. Command staff would see it. City leadership might see it before the week was over, depending on how far the report moved and whether anyone leaked the footage. Hale gave a final, controlled answer and prepared to leave the scene. He did not rant. He did not threaten anybody. He didn't need to. He had made his point, and the evidence made the rest for him. Before Hale stepped away, Price apologized again. This time the apology sounded less like damage control and more like recognition. He knew exactly what kind of failure he was looking at. Not a paperwork mistake, not a misunderstanding. A judgment failure caught on body cam from start to finish. Mays stood there while Hale walked off. That image would matter later, because once the footage started circulating inside the department, people would focus on the same thing. How a jaywalking stop turned into a public detention only because one officer refused to slow down, refused to listen, and refused to read the obvious signs in front of him. And by the end of that night, the report, the audio, and the dispatch return were already moving to people far above Eric Mays. By the next morning, the stop had already moved beyond a bad shift report. Sergeant Nolan Price filed the immediate notification. The body cam footage was preserved. Dispatch logs were flagged. The wallet inventory, detention timeline, and supervisor response all went into the review package. Once command staff saw the basics, they treated it as a major conduct issue, not a field misunderstanding. Eric Mays was pulled from patrol before the end of the next duty cycle. That happened fast for a reason. The facts were ugly and easy to follow. He had initiated a stop over jaywalking. He had cut off explanations. He had ignored visible military credentials. He had escalated to physical detention without a real threat. Then dispatch confirmed that the pedestrian was Lieutenant General Victor Hale. There was no clean defense for any of that. Internal Affairs opened the case that week. The review focused on 3 things. First, Mays escalated a low-level contact without cause. Second, he failed basic scene assessment, even after seeing indicators that should have changed his approach. Third, his body cam showed a pattern of command-driven behavior that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with control. That last point hurt him the most. Departments can sometimes excuse a quick mistake. They have a harder time excusing a full chain of bad decisions on video. Mays did not make one wrong call. He made several in a row. Each one made the next one worse. The footage stayed internal at first, but not for long. People in the department talked. Supervisors reviewed it. Training officers reviewed it. Someone copied the radio summary into a chain that reached outside the unit. Within days, the stop was known across the department. After that, local reporters got wind of it. They did not need the full body cam to understand the story. A patrolman had detained a 3-star general over jaywalking after ignoring credentials during the stop. That headline moved by itself. Once the press started asking questions, city leadership got involved. The police chief's office confirmed that a formal review was underway. The mayor's staff asked for a briefing. Legal advisors looked at exposure. Hale had not created the public problem, but his position guaranteed the incident would never stay buried in paperwork. Mays was suspended pending the outcome. Hale did not go on television. He did not start a public campaign. He handled it the way he handled the stop: controlled, direct. He gave a formal statement through military channels and left the department to deal with its own mess. That made the pressure worse, not better. He was not grandstanding. He was documenting. That forced the city to take the case seriously. The full review took several weeks. Investigators compared the body cam to Mays's initial written account. That comparison made things even worse for him. His report tried to dress the stop up as a difficult compliance situation. The video showed a calm pedestrian and an officer creating tension from the start. Once that gap showed up, his credibility dropped hard. Command staff made the decision after that. Mays was terminated. The official grounds included improper detention, unnecessary escalation, failure to follow de-escalation standards, and conduct damaging to the department. He also lost any realistic chance of being hired easily by another agency in the area. A bad stop can follow an officer. A bad stop tied to a 3-star general and preserved on body cam follows him everywhere. That was the personal fallout. The department had a bigger problem. It could not blame everything on one officer and move on. The case exposed weak training and weak supervision in a district where officers routinely cross paths with federal personnel and military officials. The chief's office had to answer a basic question. How did a patrolman in that zone think it was acceptable to force a low-level stop into a physical detention without slowing down once credentials appeared? They responded the only way they could: policy review, training changes, public damage control. By late 2025, the department issued updated field contact guidance. Officers working federal-adjacent districts had to complete new training on credential recognition, interagency awareness, and verbal de-escalation during minor enforcement stops. Supervisors were told to review body cam more aggressively for ego-driven escalation patterns. The department also added a simple rule to refresher training. When a stop stays low risk, the officer's first job is to assess, not dominate. That should have been obvious already. Now it was written down because one patrolman had forced the lesson. The case also changed how some officers in the department talked about command presence. Before this, a few of them treated command voice like the answer to everything. After this, more of them understood the difference between presence and insecurity. Presence settles a scene. Insecurity pushes it until it breaks. Victor Hale moved on with his job. He received written apologies through official channels. The city acknowledged the stop. The department documented the policy response. Hale did not need revenge. He got something more useful. A clear record, a disciplined outcome, and proof that calm conduct under pressure can expose bad judgment better than any argument. That's why this story matters. This was never really about jaywalking. It was about a patrolman who saw a minor violation and decided he needed to win a personal contest. He ignored the man in front of him. He ignored the signs in the wallet. He ignored repeated chances to slow down. Then the radio reminded him that facts do not bend to ego. That's the lesson. Authority means nothing without judgment. A badge does not fix bad instincts. And once Bodycam, dispatch, and supervisor review line up against an officer, confidence disappears fast. Tell me what you think. Was the firing justified, or should the department have handled it differently? Share the story with someone who understands how fast ego can ruin a career, and subscribe for more stories like this.
All right, both of you. Who are you and why are you carrying guns in this diner?
We're federal law enforcement. The U.S. Marshals.
That's what you say.
That's what dispatch can verify.
Stand up.
No need for that. Look at the badges
Keep
first.
that where it is.
You asked who we are. I'm answering you.
I'm not taking your word for
Then
anything.
stop talking and check.
Don't tell me how to do my
I'm
job.
telling you the quickest way to fix
This patrolman thought he was the top authority in that diner. He wasn't. He had just walked up to two black federal marshals, refused to verify who they were, and pushed himself into the kind of mistake that ends careers. The body cam caught the whole thing. Not just the approach, the exact point where he was given an easy way out and chose ego instead. Tell me where you're watching from. City, state, or country. And if you follow stories about police overreach, body cam footage, and real accountability, like the video and subscribe. The two men at the booth were Deputy U.S. Marshals Adrian Cross and Everett Lane. They were on duty, plainclothes, armed legally. They had been working a federal assignment connected to a fugitive lead in the area. They stopped at a diner near the highway for lunch and a quick case review before heading back out. They weren't drawing attention to themselves. They were eating, checking information on a phone, and keeping their conversation low. No argument, no disturbance, no behavior that would normally justify a scene. Then somebody inside the diner made a complaint about two suspicious men. That was enough for Officer Dylan Pritchard to come in. The complaint gave him a reason to ask questions. It did not give him a reason to act like he'd already found a threat. That's where he went wrong. The body cam showed him moving straight to the booth and taking over the space immediately. He didn't hang back and assess. He didn't start with a simple question. He went right into demands. Who were they? Why were they there? Why were they carrying firearms? Why hadn't they identified themselves? Cross answered him directly. He said they were federal law enforcement. He said they were working. He said they had credentials ready for inspection. That should have solved it. Any officer doing his job properly would have looked at the credentials, confirmed them, and ended the contact. Instead, Pritchard acted like the explanation annoyed him. He kept pressing. Lane repeated that they were deputy marshals and could be verified. Pritchard still didn't slow down. Cross then presented his credentials. Pritchard refused to check them. That was the real break in the incident. Up to that point, he could still claim he was sorting out a suspicious person call. Once he refused verification, that excuse started falling apart. He was no longer trying to learn what was going on. He was trying to stay in control of the scene he had already built in his head. People around them noticed it. A waitress near the counter stopped moving for a second. A few customers turned to watch. Someone near the register lifted a phone and started recording. Cross gave Pritchard another chance to fix it. He repeated that they were deputy marshals. He told him dispatch could confirm it. He kept it simple. No attitude, no show. Pritchard answered by escalating. He ordered both men to stand up. He told them they were being removed from the diner. He made it clear he was ready to force the issue. Then he called for backup. That made the situation much worse for him. Now there would be more officers, more cameras, and more reports. He had taken a routine verification and turned it into a public confrontation with federal agents. Lane understood that right away. He stayed careful and watched Pritchard closely. Cross stood up with his credentials still in hand, because it was obvious this patrolman was close to making a physical move. The diner manager, Naomi Park, stepped in once it was clear the whole room was watching. She wanted to know what was happening in her business. Pritchard gave her a vague answer and tried to make it sound like he was handling a serious problem. Cross corrected that. He told her they were federal law enforcement and that the officer had refused to inspect their credentials. That changed the room. At that point, even people who didn't know the law could see the problem. Two men had identified themselves. Credentials were available. The officer still hadn't looked. Pritchard had chances to stop. He passed on every one of them. He kept directing Cross and Lane toward the exit. He kept talking like authority came from volume. It didn't. It came from procedure, and he had already abandoned that. Outside, another patrol unit pulled into the lot. Inside, the lunch crowd had gone quiet. And Officer Dylan Pritchard was seconds away from learning that this wasn't going to end with two black men being pushed out of a diner. It was going to end with supervisor's footage review, and one question he wouldn't be able to answer. Why had he refused to look at the badges? Backup didn't solve Officer Dylan Pritchard's problem. It exposed it. The second unit came in through the front and paused after taking one look at the scene. That officer saw two plainclothesmen standing near a booth, a crowded diner watching, and Pritchard already too far up in the situation. He asked what was going on. Pritchard gave him the short version that officers use when they're trying to lock other cops into their side early. Suspicious subjects. Non-compliance. Armed. Refusing orders. That version lasted only a few seconds. Adrian Cross still had his credentials in hand. Everett Lane made it clear again that both of them were deputy U.S. Marshals on duty, and that verification had already been offered. The second officer looked at Pritchard, then at the credentials, then back at Pritchard. That hesitation mattered. He understood right away that this should have been checked before backup was called. Instead of fixing it, Pritchard kept pushing. He repeated the order to move toward the exit. He said they could sort it out outside. And that's another bad sign in bodycam cases like this. Once an officer starts losing control of the facts, he often tries to move the scene somewhere he feels stronger. Fewer witnesses, more space, more leverage. But Cross and Lane had no reason to make his mistake easier to manage. Cross stayed where he was and told him again that the credentials were available right now. Pritchard still didn't take them. That's the detail that crushed him later. Not just that he made a wrong assumption. He actively refused the one step that would have corrected it. Twice. Then again, you can't explain that away as confusion. A minute later, Sergeant Tessa Vaughn walked in. She didn't rush to join Pritchard. She stopped, scanned the room, and read the scene first. Good supervisors do that. They don't absorb the loudest voice and call it judgment. She saw customers staring. She saw Naomi Park by the counter, tense and frustrated. She saw one local officer hanging back instead of helping Pritchard close the contact. Then she saw the credentials and Cross's hand. That told her almost everything. Vaughn asked Pritchard one question before anything else. Had he verified them? He didn't have a good answer. He started talking around it. Suspicious call. Firearms. Failure to comply. Federal claim not confirmed. He was trying to rebuild the stop in real time. Vaughn cut through it and asked the same thing again in simpler terms. Had he inspected the credentials? He hadn't. That was the turn. Vaughn stepped past him and asked Cross for the credentials directly. He handed them over. She looked at his first, then Lane's. Her posture changed right away. Not dramatically. Just enough to show that this had moved from a messy contact to a department problem. She checked the IDs, matched the names, and asked a couple of quick questions about assignment status. Cross answered. Lane answered. Both stayed controlled because they knew the real audience now wasn't Pritchard. It was the supervisor, the body cam, and everyone who'd review this later. Vaughn gave the credentials back and then looked at Pritchard in a way that made the room go even quieter. She told him to stand down. No one in that diner needed legal training to understand what had just happened. The officer who had spent the last several minutes acting like he owned the room had just been corrected in front of everyone. The two men he was trying to throw out were exactly who they said they were. He had been told that from the start. He had ignored it. Pritchard didn't handle that well. He tried to defend the stop one more time. He argued that they should have identified themselves sooner, that he had a suspicious person complaint, that they weren't following commands. Vaughn wasn't buying any of it. The body cam audio had already buried that argument. They had identified themselves. They had offered credentials. He refused to inspect them. That's not a gray area. That's failure. She then apologized to Cross and Lane on scene. Not in a soft, private way. In a clear voice. The kind meant for witnesses, too. She acknowledged that they had identified themselves and that the matter should have been resolved immediately. That was department damage control, but it was also a message to every officer standing there. This one wasn't getting covered up with the usual language. Pritchard's whole posture changed after that. He stopped directing the scene because he couldn't. He stopped talking over people because now his supervisor was the one asking questions. Body cam footage often catches that moment, and this case had it. He went from command mode to explanation mode in less than 30 seconds. Cross didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. He told Vaughn that the issue wasn't a mistaken approach. The issue was that her officer had refused lawful verification and threatened force anyway. That was the point. A bad stop can start with a wrong assumption. It becomes something else when the officer keeps escalating after the facts are right in front of him. Lane added one thing that also mattered. He made clear that they were on an active federal assignment and that delaying or interfering with them wasn't just embarrassing. It had operational consequences. That's where the local officers standing nearby started to understand how serious this had become. This wasn't a diner argument. This was a local patrolman obstructing federal agents while they were working. Naomi Park spoke up after Vaughn settled the scene. She confirmed what customers had already seen. The marshals hadn't caused trouble. Pritchard had come in aggressive and refused to listen. That statement helped because it came from someone with no stake in the law enforcement side. Just a business owner who wanted the truth straight. Vaughn asked Cross and Lane if they needed medical attention or wanted additional units contacted. They said no. They wanted names, badge numbers, and confirmation that the incident would be documented properly. That's how experienced officers handle a situation like this. They don't chase theater. They lock in the record. Pritchard had nothing useful left to say by then. Vaughn pulled him aside near the entrance, but not far enough to hide what was happening. The body cam still captured pieces of it. Her tone was controlled and flat. That usually means the supervisor is angrier than the yelling type. She asked why he had refused to inspect federal credentials. He tried to justify it again by going back to the original complaint. She shut that down. The complaint was the reason to check, not the reason to ignore the check. That was the moment his career started collapsing in public. Not when the complaint came in. Not when he approached the booth. When his own sergeant had to explain basic procedure to him in front of witnesses because he'd let pride run the stop. Cross and Lane got their information, finished with Vaughn, and walked out of the diner under their own authority, not under Pritchard's orders. Big difference. The room stayed quiet while they left. People knew they had just watched something serious. Phones were still out. Some of those clips would be online before the end of the day. Pritchard stayed behind with Vaughn. He had come in expecting to remove 2 black men from a diner. Instead, he had handed his supervisor a Bodycam file, civilian witnesses, a federal complaint risk, and a scene no department could explain away with a bland statement. And that was only the start. By that afternoon, the diner footage and the Bodycam clips were already moving. First through local group chats, then law enforcement circles, then local media pages that knew exactly what kind of video gets attention fast. A patrol officer tried to throw 2 black deputy U.S. marshals out of a diner, refused to check credentials, called backup, and got corrected by his own sergeant in front of witnesses. That story was always going to travel. The department felt pressure almost immediately. At first, the usual language showed up: review underway, administrative inquiry, facts being gathered. That kind of wording buys time when the department hopes a story will cool off. This one didn't cool off. It got worse. Once supervisors pulled the full body cam, Officer Dylan Pritchard lost the little cover he still had. The footage showed that Adrian Cross had identified himself early. Everett Lane had backed that up. Credentials had been offered. Pritchard ignored them. Then he threatened removal anyway. Then he called backup. That sequence mattered a lot. If he had checked and been confused, he might have argued bad judgment. If he had paused and corrected himself, maybe he survives with discipline. But he didn't do either. He was wrong. And then he committed to being wrong. That's what killed him. The federal side didn't leave it alone either. Cross and Lane filed the contact up their chain the same day. Clean report, straight facts. They noted the refusal to verify, the threatened use of force, the interruption to an active assignment, and the presence of multiple witnesses. Once that landed in the right inboxes, this stopped being a local embarrassment. Now there was a federal paper trail attached to it. That changed the department's tone fast. By the next morning, Pritchard was off the street and under emergency administrative suspension. Not a quiet desk move, not a scheduling adjustment. A suspension that told everyone inside the department this case had become radioactive. Then his history started coming back up. Internal reviewers pulled prior complaints and found a pattern that should have been dealt with earlier. Aggressive stops, escalation during routine contacts, citizen complaints that described him as disrespectful and quick to turn minor situations into authority contests. A couple had gone nowhere. One had ended with insufficient evidence. Another had been treated as a communication issue instead of a conduct issue. That's how these officers stay on the job longer than they should. Not because nobody sees the problem, because every single incident gets treated like a separate misunderstanding until one of them becomes too public to ignore. Pritchard's supervisors now had a bigger problem than one bad diner incident. They had to answer why an officer with that kind of pattern was still in position to make a scene with federal agents in the first place. Local reporters picked up that angle quickly. Civil rights groups did too. They weren't just asking what happened in the diner. They were asking how many warning signs the department had stepped over before it got to this point. The legal side looked bad too. A local patrol officer does not get to interfere with federal agents just because he doesn't like the way a situation looks. Once valid credentials are offered, the duty is simple. Verify. Slow down. Use procedure. Pritchard did the opposite. He refused verification and moved toward force. That opened the door to claims well beyond poor communication. Qualified immunity also looked weaker here than departments like to pretend. That's because the facts were basic. This wasn't a split-second use of force case with a dozen moving parts. It was a simple verification failure caught on camera. He had multiple chances to do the right thing. He chose not to. That's much harder to defend. The department finally released a formal statement late the next day. It confirmed that Officer Dylan Pritchard had been suspended immediately pending termination proceedings. It acknowledged that the contact involved federally commissioned law enforcement officers. It also stated that the officer had failed to follow department procedure related to verification, de-escalation, and supervisory notification. That wording was careful, but the message was obvious. They were cutting him loose. Cross and Lane didn't celebrate publicly. They didn't need to. From their side, this had never been about getting the loudest headline. It was about making sure the record stayed accurate and the department couldn't rewrite what happened. They had experience. They knew how fast a clean incident can get distorted if the paperwork isn't nailed down early. Sergeant Tessa Vaughn also came under review, but for a different reason. Not because she caused the problem. Because command staff wanted to know whether warning signs about Pritchard had been raised before and ignored higher up. Once departments get embarrassed in public, everybody suddenly wants a timeline. The union tried to slow the fall. That's normal. They argued stress, incomplete context, officer safety concerns. Same playbook. It didn't land well because the video undercut all of it. Officer safety doesn't explain refusing credentials. Stress doesn't explain repeated escalation after identity is offered. Incomplete context doesn't work when the camera already captured the missing context. Pritchard's career wasn't technically over yet on paper. Realistically, it was done. Even before a final termination vote, the suspension itself had done major damage. His name was tied to a Bodycam case involving racial bias, federal interference, and ignored complaints. Other departments would see that. Any future application would carry it. He had turned a local patrol job into a national red flag. And the part that really stayed with people was how avoidable it was. Nobody had tricked him. Nobody had rushed him. Nobody had hidden credentials from him. He was offered the truth early. He rejected it because he wanted control more than accuracy. That's the whole case in one line. The city also started hearing from residents with their own stories. Traffic stops that escalated for no reason. Street contacts that felt personal. Situations where officers came in hot and made everything worse. Some of those people had filed complaints before and heard nothing back. Now they had an example the public couldn't ignore. That's when this stopped being only about one patrolman. Now it was about the system around him. The supervisors who let behavior slide. The complaint process that filtered out patterns. The culture that let some officers treat correction like humiliation instead of part of the job. And that set up the next phase. Because once the footage was out and the suspension was public, the bigger question wasn't whether Dylan Pritchard would survive the scandal. It was whether the department would change anything at all. Once the suspension became public, the department had one job left. Prove this wasn't just a quick sacrifice to calm people down. That was the real test. A lot of departments know how to suspend one officer when the footage is bad enough. The harder part is dealing with everything that helped him stay comfortable doing it. Training gaps, weak supervisors, complaint systems that treat patterns like random accidents. A culture where some officers think backing down after new facts come in makes them look weak. That last part sat right at the center of this case. Dylan Pritchard didn't lose control because the situation was confusing. He lost control because his pride got involved. The second Adrian Cross and Everett Lane told him they were federal law enforcement and offered credentials, he had a clean way to reset. He didn't take it. He treated correction like disrespect. That's the kind of mindset that turns a basic contact into a public abuse of authority. Bodycam transparency is what kept this one from getting buried. Without the footage, this easily could have been reduced to competing reports. Officer says they were evasive. Marshals say they identified themselves. Department says facts are under review. Story dies in a week. That's how it usually goes when there isn't clear video. Here the camera pinned down the timeline. Identification was offered, credentials were available, verification was refused. Backup was called anyway. A supervisor had to come in and stop it. That's why body cams matter when the footage is actually reviewed and released. Not because cameras magically fix policing, they don't. They matter because they cut down the room for fiction. The police board meetings after that drew more attention than usual. Residents showed up with the diner incident on their minds, but they didn't stop there. They asked how many earlier complaints against Pritchard had been screened out, downgraded, or dismissed. They asked what supervisors were required to do when an officer kept escalating minor contacts. They asked whether the department had any written rule requiring credential verification before a local officer detained or threatened force against someone claiming federal status. Those are the right questions. Specific questions. The kind departments hate when the public starts asking them in a room that goes on the record. Command staff had to answer for more than one officer. They had to explain why warning signs hadn't triggered stronger review. They had to explain whether race played a role in how suspicion was formed and how force was threatened. They had to explain why the department seemed more responsive after public embarrassment than after citizen complaints. Civil rights attorneys also weighed in, and their point was simple. Cases like this are exactly why qualified immunity keeps getting challenged. The doctrine is often used to shield officers unless a prior case matches the facts closely enough. But when misconduct is this basic, that defense starts looking thin. Refusing to inspect credentials and escalating anyway is not some impossible judgment call. It is a clear failure of duty. That's what makes the legal exposure real. The department eventually announced several changes. Mandatory documentation anytime an officer receives law enforcement credentials from another agency. Automatic supervisor response in disputed identity contacts. Expanded review of prior complaints for officers involved in high-risk escalation incidents. Better, necessary. Still not enough by itself. Rules only matter if supervisors enforce them early. That was the lesson people kept coming back to. Pritchard didn't become reckless in one afternoon. He had a history. The diner incident just happened in front of the wrong people, with the wrong cameras, at the wrong time for the department to protect him. That's not reform, that's pressure. Cross and Lane went back to work. And that's another part worth noticing. They didn't become symbols by choice. They were doing their jobs, stopped for lunch, and got dragged into a power display by a patrolman who thought authority came from acting bigger than everyone else in the room. They handled it the right way. They stayed controlled. They kept the record clean. They let the facts do the damage, and the facts did plenty. Dylan Pritchard went from a patrol officer trying to run a diner to a suspended officer facing termination, federal scrutiny, and a public record that will follow him long after the headlines move on. That happened because he ignored the easiest professional step available to him. Check the credentials, slow down, use procedure. He chose ego instead. That's what this story really shows. A lot of abuse of authority doesn't start with some giant conspiracy. It starts with one officer deciding he cannot be corrected. Then the system around him either stops him early or lets him keep going until the mistake gets too expensive to hide. In this case, the stop was recorded. Witnesses were there. The sergeant didn't join the nonsense. The marshals knew how to document it. That combination forced accountability. It also exposed how fragile accountability still is. Take away the footage, and this probably looks very different. Take away the witnesses, and maybe the report gets softened. Take away the federal connection, and maybe the discipline gets lighter. That's why local oversight still matters. Not as a slogan, as routine pressure, police board meetings, complaint records, public records requests. Follow up after the headlines die. That's where departments usually hope people lose interest. People shouldn't, because suspension sounds strong in the first news cycle. Permanent change takes more than that. It takes attention after the cameras move on. It takes people checking whether policy changed, whether supervisors changed, and whether the next officer with the same pattern gets stopped before he creates another disaster. That's the part viewers should remember. This wasn't a tough officer keeping order. It was a patrolman making a bad racialized assumption, refusing correction, and learning too late that volume is not authority. Procedure is. Facts are. Accountability is. What would you have done if you were sitting in that diner watching it happen? And do you trust departments to fix this kind of problem without public pressure? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who follows police accountability issues. And subscribe for more stories like this.
You got a gun in the car?
Yes, and I told you before anything moved, I'm federal. Active duty Secret Service. My credentials are available.
Don't move. Don't move. Keep your hands right there.
I'm not reaching. I identified myself.
Stop
active
talking.
Duty Secret Service. I'm requesting a supervisor.
Stop talking.
No, you need to hear me clearly. I am active duty Secret.
Could one bad stop end an officer's career for good? A patrol cop pulled a gun on a black father during a routine traffic stop, not knowing the man behind the wheel was an active duty Secret Service agent, trained to handle pressure better than most people in uniform. The footage didn't leave much room for excuses, and once supervisors and federal officials got involved, the whole thing started collapsing fast. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about police overreach, body cam truth, and real consequences, like and subscribe. Cases like this don't fall apart because people tell the truth. They fall apart because cameras do. By the time Officer Travis Cole stepped out of his cruiser, he'd already decided the stop was bigger than it was. The vehicle was a dark SUV moving through a residential area just after dinner. The reason for the stop was minor. Cole later tried to dress it up in official language, but the dispatch audio told a simpler story. He had called in a basic traffic stop. No felony indicator, no violent suspect alert, no report of aggressive driving, nothing that called for panic. Inside the SUV, Aaron Whitaker was driving home with his wife and 2 kids. Aaron was 40, black, calm, and used to staying sharp in tense situations. He worked active duty with the Secret Service. That didn't make him untouchable, and he knew it. It did mean he understood procedure better than the officer walking up to his window. He knew how stops were supposed to go. He also knew some officers stopped listening the moment they saw a black man who didn't act nervous enough for them. Cole came in hot from the start. He didn't approach like a man handling a traffic issue. He approached like he wanted control first and facts later. His tone was aggressive before Aaron had even said much. Aaron kept both hands where they could be seen. His wife, Nicole, stayed still in the passenger seat. Their kids sat in the back, quiet at first, trying to figure out why this stop already felt wrong. Aaron did what trained law enforcement officers are taught to do when a firearm is in the vehicle. He disclosed it early. He explained that he was federal law enforcement and that he had credentials. He made it clear he wasn't reaching for anything unless instructed. That should have slowed the stop down. Instead, Cole escalated almost immediately. He stepped back, pulled his weapon, and pointed it at Aaron through the driver's side window. That was the moment the stop crossed the line. Aaron hadn't lunged. He hadn't argued. He hadn't hidden his hands. He hadn't refused instructions. He had given the officer exactly what a cautious officer should want during a stop involving a weapon: calm disclosure, clear communication, and no sudden movement. Cole ignored all of it. Aaron stayed controlled. He reported what he was doing and kept his hands visible. He told Cole again that he was active duty Secret Service. He explained that his credentials were available and that the safest move was to call a supervisor and verify through dispatch. That was the professional answer. It was also the obvious one. Cole didn't take it. He kept the gun up and started issuing rushed commands. Some didn't even fit together. He wanted total stillness, then immediate compliance with actions that required movement. He wanted answers, but every answer seemed to annoy him more. Aaron's calm tone didn't settle him down. It made him more suspicious. That's the kind of mistake bad officers make. They read composure as attitude. They treat professionalism like disrespect. Then they double down because backing off would mean admitting they misread the whole thing. Nicole understood where this was heading before the kids did. She turned slightly and tried to keep them quiet without making sudden moves herself. She also started recording on her phone once Cole drew the gun. Smart move. In cases like this, one camera helps. 3 cameras change everything. Cole's body cam was running. The dash cam was running. Nicole's phone captured the family's side of it. Later, a neighbor's doorbell camera added another angle from across the street. That mattered because officers like Cole usually count on their version getting written first and believed first. Aaron kept giving him a safe path out. He said he would comply. He said the officer could verify him. He said a supervisor needed to respond before anybody made the situation worse. He wasn't being difficult. He was trying to stop a nervous local officer from turning a traffic stop into a shooting scene. Cole treated that as resistance. He started talking like Aaron's federal ID was probably fake before he'd even seen it. That told everyone what this really was. Not confusion, not uncertainty. Cole had made up his mind early and didn't like being forced to reconsider it. A black man in a nice SUV, speaking clearly, staying calm, identifying himself as federal law enforcement, and refusing to act scared enough for Cole's comfort, that was all it took. Aaron understood exactly what kind of stop this had become. At that point, this wasn't about a citation. It wasn't even about officer safety anymore, not in any honest sense. It was about control. Cole wanted to prove he was still the one in charge, even though he had already mishandled the stop. Then he made it worse. With the gun still trained on Aaron, Cole tried to force him to retrieve identification without waiting for backup or a supervisor to manage the movement. That was reckless. Aaron had already explained where his credentials were. He had already asked for verification. He had already given the officer a clean way to lower the risk. Aaron refused to make a blind move while a gun was pointed at him. That refusal made sense. It was lawful, too. Any trained officer should have understood that. Cole acted like it was defiance. This is where a lot of the departments start lying to themselves after the fact. They call it a rapidly evolving situation. They say the officer had limited time. They claim fear forced hard choices. None of that fit here. Cole had time. Aaron gave him information. Aaron gave him procedure. Aaron gave him a way to verify everything without gambling with anybody's life. Cole didn't want verification yet. He wanted compliance on his terms. The kids were crying by then. Nicole kept recording. Aaron stayed steady because he knew one wrong movement could get him shot in front of his family by a man who had already decided he was a threat first and a citizen second. Then Aaron did the one thing that would later wreck Cole's entire defense. He repeated clearly and on camera that he was active duty Secret Service and requested a supervisor again. Now the clock had started. Because once another unit arrived and dispatch checked the name, Cole wasn't going to be able to hide behind guesswork. He was going to have to explain why he pointed a gun at a cooperative federal agent during a low-level traffic stop in front of 2 children. And that explanation was never going to hold up. The stop changed when the supervisor arrived. Sergeant Dana Ruiz pulled up, saw Cole still aiming his gun at a seated driver, and knew the stop had already gone too far. She didn't need Aaron's job title yet to see the basic problem. The driver was inside the SUV, his hands were visible, his wife was recording, and 2 kids were in the back seat. That was not the scene of a man forcing an officer into deadly risk. Cole started explaining himself right away. He tried to frame Aaron as suspicious and uncooperative. Ruiz cut through that fast. She wanted facts, not cover language. Had Aaron threatened anyone? No. Had he tried to get out? No. Had he reached suddenly? No. Had he refused to identify himself? No. He had identified himself several times and said he was federal law enforcement. That put Cole in a bad spot immediately. Ruiz told him to lower the weapon. He did, but not with confidence. He still looked like he wanted to defend the draw instead of fixing the stop. That hesitation mattered. It showed he was still committed to the mistake. Once the gun came down, Aaron repeated the same information in a calm, controlled way. He said he was active duty Secret Service. He said he had federal credentials. He said he did not want to reach for anything until Ruiz gave clear instructions and verified his identity through dispatch. Ruiz handled it the way Cole should have handled it from the start. She asked where the credentials were kept. Aaron told her. She told him not to move yet. Then she called dispatch and started the verification process. No drama, just procedure. That was the real turning point. Up to that point, Cole had treated Aaron like a man making excuses. Ruiz treated him like a person whose status could be checked in a few minutes. That difference ended the guessing game. Dispatch ran Aaron's information and sent it up the line. Ruiz asked for confirmation through the correct channels. The return came back clean. Aaron Whitaker was exactly who he said he was. Active duty Secret Service. Currently employed, legally armed under his federal role. That ended Cole's version of the stop. Everything he had acted suspicious about was real. The badge, the credentials, the firearm disclosure, the calm tone. None of it supported his decision to draw a gun on a cooperative driver. Ruiz then gave Aaron careful instructions to retrieve his credentials. He followed them without any issue. Slow movements, clear hands, no sudden action. The same controlled behavior he had shown from the start. That hurt Cole even more, because it proved the stop had never required the level of force he used. Nicole kept recording the whole time. That put pressure on everyone at the scene. Ruiz understood that this wasn't going to disappear into a one-sided report. The family had video. The patrol units had video. Dispatch audio existed. The scene was already documented from too many angles for anyone to rewrite it cleanly later. Cole went quiet once the verification came back. That told its own story. He had come into the stop acting certain. Now he had nothing solid to stand on. He couldn't say Aaron had lied. He couldn't say the credentials were fake. He couldn't claim he had no way to check. The process had just shown how simple verification would have been if he had done his job first and tried intimidation second. Ruiz tried to close the stop in a controlled way, but the damage was already done. Aaron didn't start yelling. He didn't give them a speech. He stayed focused on the record. He asked for the names and badge numbers of everyone on scene. He asked whether Cole's weapon display would be documented as a use of force event. He asked whether the body cam footage would be preserved. Those questions landed hard because they showed he understood exactly what the department would now have to explain. Cole had pulled a gun on a man who knew policy, evidence rules, reporting duties, and how weak police paperwork looks when video says something else. Ruiz gave Aaron the identifying information he requested and told him the incident would be reviewed. That sounded official, but Aaron wasn't relying on local promises. He had already seen how quickly one officer had turned a basic stop into a dangerous one. He was not going to leave the next step to the same department that caused the problem. Once the family was cleared to leave, Aaron drove home and reported the stop through his field office that same night. That changed the scale of everything. This was no longer a local complaint from a driver saying an officer overreacted. This was an active-duty federal protective agent reporting that a local patrol officer had pointed a gun at him during a low-level traffic stop after clear disclosure while his wife and children were in the vehicle. The Secret Service took that seriously right away. They requested preservation of all relevant evidence: bodycam files, dashcam files, dispatch recordings, radio traffic, field notes. The department was now dealing with more than embarrassment. It was dealing with federal scrutiny and a clean paper trail. Then Cole made another mistake. He filed a report that did not match the stop very well. He described Aaron as difficult. The recording showed Aaron staying careful and precise. He suggested the stop developed quickly because of driver behavior. The video showed that Cole created the tension by escalating before he had verified anything. He used broad phrases that made him sound reasonable, but the actual footage undercut them. That kind of report is hard to defend when the camera catches the full sequence. By the next morning, the department knew this was serious. Internal Affairs had the files. Command staff had been briefed. City attorneys were paying attention. The Secret Service field office was involved. And the worst part for Cole was simple. The facts were clear. He had not drawn on a threatening suspect. He had drawn on a calm federal agent who had tried to keep the stop safe while Cole kept making it worse. By the next morning, this was no longer a bad stop. It was an evidence case. Aaron Whitaker had already reported the incident through his Secret Service field office. Nicole had saved her phone video in multiple places. The department had its own Bodycam and dashcam files. Dispatch audio existed too. That combination boxed Travis Cole in before Internal Affairs even started asking questions. The first issue was simple. His report didn't match the footage. He wrote Aaron like a difficult driver who forced the stop to escalate. The video showed a man staying still, speaking clearly, and trying to move the stop back into normal procedure. Cole wrote the situation as fast and uncertain. The recording showed something else. He had time. He had information. He had repeated notice that the driver was identifying himself as federal law enforcement. He chose force anyway. That gap destroyed the easiest defense. Departments can excuse a lot when facts are fuzzy. They can say an officer made a judgment call. They can say the public only saw one angle. They can say stress affected perception. That didn't work here. There were too many angles and they all leaned the same way. Internal Affairs pulled everything. Body cam, dash cam, radio logs, dispatch audio. Then they checked the timeline line by line. When did Aaron first disclose the firearm? When did he identify himself as federal law enforcement? When did he request a supervisor? When did Cole draw? When did Ruiz arrive? When did verification happen? Once investigators laid it out that way, Cole looked worse with every minute. Then they checked policy. That's where the case got ugly for the department. Local officers are not expected to blindly trust anyone who claims federal status. Nobody serious expects that. They are expected to verify the claim without turning a routine stop into a shooting risk when the driver is cooperative and contained. That's the point. Slow it down. Control the movement. Call a supervisor. Use dispatch. Confirm credentials. Cole skipped the important part and jumped straight to dominance. Training records didn't help him either. The department had de-escalation modules. It had reporting standards for weapon displays. It had procedures for supervisor response. On paper, the department could say Cole knew better because the department had taught better. That might help the city later. It did nothing for Cole. Then command staff reviewed his personnel history. That's when this stopped looking like one random mistake. He didn't have some movie villain file full of scandal. Real life usually isn't that neat. What he had was a pattern of smaller warnings, complaints about his tone during stops, notes that he escalated conversations too quickly, a prior counseling entry tied to command presence and judgment. Nothing that forced the department to fire him back then. Enough to make them look careless now. That's how careers really get wrecked. Not by one bad minute out of nowhere. By a series of ignored signs that finally collide with undeniable footage. The Secret Service field office pushed in harder once it reviewed Aaron's complaint and the available video. It wanted retention notices on every file. It wanted Cole's report. It wanted use of force documentation. It wanted the department's written training materials for stops involving armed off-duty law enforcement. That was federal pressure, not friendly interest. And once federal supervisors start asking for paper, local departments stop pretending everything is routine. City attorneys got briefed early. They had to. There was clear civil exposure now. A cooperative black father had a gun pointed at him in front of his wife and children during a minor traffic stop after he disclosed a legal firearm and identified himself as a federal agent. That sentence alone could cost money. The video could cost more. Cole's bad report made it worse because juries notice when officers stretch facts after the camera is already rolling. Nicole's video went public before the department had its story straight. That changed the pace. Local accounts picked it up first, then larger pages that tracked police misconduct, then news stations. The clip spread because people didn't need expert analysis to understand it. A family sat in a stopped SUV. The father stayed controlled. The officer acted like control itself was suspicious. Anyone watching could see who was trying to manage the risk and who was creating it. The department released a careful statement. too careful. It said the incident was under review. It said officer and public safety remain priorities. It said all facts would be examined. That kind of statement is supposed to buy time. It only works when the video is unclear. Here it sounded like stalling. People pushed back immediately. Community leaders asked why the officer drew at all. Former law enforcement officers on local panels said the stop should have moved to verification much earlier. Civil rights attorneys said the same thing in sharper language. Then the harder questions started gaining traction. If Aaron Whitaker had not been a federal agent, would anyone have taken this seriously? That question hit because everyone knew the answer. His job didn't create the injustice. It just made it harder to bury. Aaron kept his complaint focused. Smart again. He didn't let the story drift into vague outrage. He stayed with the facts. Clear disclosure, calm behavior. Weapon drawn without clear cause. Credentials ignored. Supervisor requested. Verification delayed. Family present. Every part of that sequence mattered. Together they formed a clean picture of failure. Nicole's role mattered too. Her recording made sure the family's point of view stayed in the case. Not the department's version. Not just the body cam angle chosen by police. Her footage captured the emotional reality inside the SUV. The kids crying. Aaron staying steady. Cole sounding like a man more interested in winning the stop than handling it correctly. That kind of video lands hard because it shows the cost of bad policing in real time, not as paperwork later. Inside the department, Cole was already becoming a liability. Supervisors couldn't defend the draw cleanly. Ruiz's presence on scene made it harder for them to pretend the stop stayed reasonable throughout. She had ordered the gun lowered. She had verified Aaron correctly. Her actions exposed the obvious point. The situation became manageable the second someone followed procedure. That left Cole alone with his choices. By the end of the week, he was off the street. Officially, it was administrative leave, pending investigation. That's the usual first move. Get the officer out of uniform, lock down the evidence, and buy time. But everyone watching knew what it meant. The department didn't trust him in the field while the case was under review. And Cole knew it too. The bigger problem for him was no longer public embarrassment. It was credibility. Once an officer's report stops matching video, every later explanation sounds weaker. Once federal agencies are involved, weak explanations get tested harder. Once a pattern shows up in the file, the department starts protecting itself instead of protecting the officer. That shift had started. Travis Cole was no longer the man who controlled the stop. He was the problem the department needed to contain. A few weeks later, the department finished the review. Travis Cole was fired. The reasons were clear. He escalated a minor traffic stop without enough cause, ignored a safe verification process after Aaron identified himself as active duty Secret Service, and wrote a report that didn't match the video. That report hurt him almost as much as the stop itself. Bad judgment is one problem. Bad judgment followed by a weak report is usually the end. The Secret Service kept pressure on the city the whole time. Aaron's field office wanted the footage preserved, the use of force paperwork reviewed, and the department's stop procedures examined. Once that happened, this stopped being a local embarrassment. It became a federal problem too. The city also faced civil exposure. The facts were terrible for them. Aaron had stayed calm. He had disclosed the firearm. He had identified himself. His wife and kids were in the SUV. Cole still pointed a gun at him during a low-level stop. The video spread because people could see how simple the case was. Aaron gave the officer a safe way to handle it. Cole chose force instead. The department then changed policy. Officers now had clearer steps for verifying federal credentials during stops. Drawn weapons on routine stops triggered tighter review. Supervisors had to respond faster when a stop escalated without a clear threat. The city later settled with the family. Aaron stayed measured through all of it. He made one point clear. His job was not the real issue. The real issue was that a black man could do everything right and still get treated like a danger first. That's why the story stuck. Cole thought he was controlling the stop. He was actually building the case that ended his career.